The testing chamber fell silent as the human weapon powered up. Admiral Vexith of the Galactic Concordat stood behind reinforced glass, his 4 eyes fixed on the simple rifle mounted on the test stand. It looked crude compared to the elegant plasma casters his people used. The humans called it a prototype, nothing special, just something to demonstrate their capabilities. Vexith had seen thousands of weapons in his 300 years of service. He had fought in the border wars, survived the Krell invasion, and earned his position through blood and strategy. He knew weapons. He knew their limits. Every species in the galaxy knew the limits. The mathematics of combat were as fundamental as gravity. Plasma could only remain stable for 2.3 seconds before collapse. Any longer, and the magnetic containment would fail catastrophically. The weapon would destroy itself and likely its user. This was not opinion. This was physics, proven by the Thaxian Science Collective over 4,000 years ago, and confirmed by every species since Dot the human technician. A young woman with dark hair tied back checked her datapad one final time. She wore no protective gear beyond simple eye shields. That alone troubled Vexith. When testing new weapons, proper protocol demanded full combat armor and remote operation. The humans seemed almost casual about the whole affair. "Ready when you are, Admiral," the technician said. Her voice carried no nervousness, no doubt, just simple confidence. Vexith gestured with his upper right hand. "Proceed." The technician tapped her datapad. The rifle hummed to life. A brilliant blue-white plasma stream erupted from the barrel, striking the target downrange. Beautiful and deadly, exactly as expected for the first 2 seconds. Then it kept going. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. 5. Vexith felt his breathing quicken. His assistant, a young officer named Kelth, made a choking sound beside him. The plasma stream held perfectly stable, not even a flicker of degradation. 10 seconds. 15. 20. "Impossible," Vexith whispered. His translator caught it and broadcast it through the observation room. Several other Concordat observers had gone completely still, their various biological processes frozen in shock. 30 seconds. 40. The plasma burned like a miniature star. Controlled and directed with perfect precision. At 47 seconds, the technician tapped her datapad again. The plasma stream cut off instantly. The rifle powered down with a simple mechanical whine. No explosion. No catastrophic failure. The weapon sat on its mount, looking exactly as it had before at test. Even the barrel showed no signs of heat stress. The observation room erupted in noise. Officers shouted in a dozen languages, some accusing the humans of trickery, others demanding to see the weapon up close. Vexith raised all 4 hands for silence. The room gradually quieted. "How?" he asked simply. The technician smiled. "Would you like to see it again? Maybe fire it yourself this time?" 20 minutes later, Vexith stood in the testing chamber itself, holding the rifle. It felt light, almost too light. The grip was designed for human hands, but adjusted easily to his larger fingers. The technician stood beside him, showing him the simple controls. "The trigger here," she pointed. "Safety switch here. This dial adjusts the plasma intensity." Simple as that. Simple. Nothing about this was simple. Vexith had read the technical specifications the humans had provided. He understood perhaps a quarter of it, and what he understood made no sense. The weapon used something the humans called recursive magnetic field correction. The plasma containment system adjusted itself thousands of times per second, predicting and correcting instabilities before they could cascade. But that should not work. The Thaxian proofs showed clearly that plasma degradation happened faster than any correction system could respond. It was a mathematical certainty. "Fire when ready," the technician said, stepping back to a safe distance. Vexith aimed at the target and pulled the trigger. The weapon kicked slightly against his shoulder, much less than he expected. The plasma stream shot forward, stable and brilliant. He held it for 5 seconds, then 10, then released the trigger. The weapon performed flawlessly. "Your turn," he said to Kelth, who had been allowed into the chamber. The younger officer took the rifle with trembling hands. He fired. The same perfect result. They spent the next hour testing the weapon. They fired it from different angles. They fired it in rapid bursts. They fired it continuously until the power cell depleted after nearly 6 minutes of sustained plasma stream. The weapon never faltered, never overheated, never came close to the catastrophic failure that should have happened in the first 3 seconds. Finally, Vexith set the rifle down and looked at the technician. "This changes everything." She shook her head. "This is just a rifle, Admiral. Basic infantry equipment. We have much better weapons, but we thought we should start small. Let the galaxy adjust slowly." Vexith felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What do you mean, basic?" The technician pulled up a hologram from her datapad. It showed a much larger weapon, mounted on what looked like a vehicle. "This is our standard anti-armor plasma cannon. It maintains coherent plasma for roughly 12 minutes at maximum power. The ship-mounted versions can fire indefinitely as long as they have power." "That is not possible," Vexith said, but his voice lacked conviction. He had just fired the impossible with his own hands. "Admiral, with respect, your people decided what was possible and then stopped looking for alternatives. We just decided to solve the problems instead of accepting them." The meeting that followed involved 30 of the Concordat's top weapons scientists. They examined the rifle, scanned it, analyzed every component. The human delegation, led by a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chun, answered questions with patience that Vexith found almost insulting. They were not smug, not superior. They simply treated the impossible as obvious. "The plasma does destabilize," Dr. Chun explained to a group of increasingly frustrated Taxian physicists. "Your mathematics is correct. Plasma breaks down exactly as your models predict. We just correct it faster than it breaks down. Think of it like catching a falling object. The object still falls. We just keep catching it and throwing it back up." "But the correction speed required," one of the Thaxians began, "is very fast, yes. So we made the correction system very fast. We also made it predict where the instabilities would form before they fully manifested. Prevention is easier than correction. The computational power alone is substantial, yes. So we built better computers. Smaller, faster, more efficient. We needed them for the weapons to work, so we made them work." Vexith listened to the exchange and realized something profound. The humans had not discovered some new physics or exotic material. They had simply refused to accept that the problem could not be solved. Every obstacle, every limitation, every mathematical proof of impossibility, they had treated as an engineering challenge rather than a final answer. As the meeting drew to a close, Vexith approached Dr. Chen privately. "Your people have had these weapons for how long?" "Functional prototypes?" "About 15 years. Full production models?" 7 years. And you waited until now to show us?" Chen met his eyes steadily. "We wanted to make sure they worked. Really worked, in every condition, with every type of user, under every kind of stress. We did not want to promise something we could not deliver." Vexith understood. The humans had taken something impossible and made it reliable. That was somehow more impressive than the initial breakthrough. The galaxy was about to change, and Vexith suspected that the rifle he had fired was just the beginning. The humans had not joined the Concordat as students learning from older, wiser species. They had joined as engineers ready to solve problems everyone else had given up on. That night, Vexith filed his report to the Concordat Military Council. He chose his words carefully, knowing they would be read by the most powerful beings in known space. His conclusion was simple and terrifying. Humanity had made the impossible routine, and they were just getting started. 6 months after the demonstration, Dr. Sarah Chun stood in an auditorium on the Concordat Central Station, facing 2,000 of the galaxy's finest scientific minds. They had come from hundreds of worlds, representing species that had developed weapons technology for thousands or even millions of years. They had come demanding answers, explanations, and most of all, understanding. The auditorium buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages. Some attendees looked angry, others confused, many simply curious. Chen had given presentations before, but never to an audience this large or this important. She took a breath and began. "I want to tell you a story," she said. The translation systems carried her words across the vast chamber. "It is a human story, but I think it matters here." The audience quieted somewhat, though skeptical murmurs continued. For many years, human scientists said that bumblebees could not fly. We did the mathematics. We calculated the wing size, the body weight, the air resistance. According to our models, flight was impossible. The bee was too heavy, and its wings too small. The equations were clear. She paused, letting the translations catch up. But bumblebees did not know about our equations. They did not know flight was impossible. So they flew anyway. Every day, doing the impossible, because nobody told them they could not. A Thaxian scientist in the front row made a dismissive gesture. "A charming story, Doctor, but we are not discussing insects. We are discussing fundamental physics. Your weapons violate established principles." Chun shook her head. "No, they do not. That is the point I am here to make. We have not broken your laws of physics. We have not discovered some exotic new force or material. We simply decided that your combat limitations theorem was incomplete." The murmuring grew louder, more hostile. She pressed on. "Every species in this room took the theorem as truth. You measured the limits of weapons technology and declared them absolute. Plasma stability, kinetic velocity, energy dissipation. You found the walls and stopped building. We found the walls and asked why they were there." She pulled up a hologram showing a simple plasma containment field, the kind used in every energy weapon in the galaxy. "This is the standard design. It works within the theorem's limits. Very efficient, very reliable, very limited. When the plasma begins to destabilize, the containment fails. This happens at 2.3 seconds, always. You have all measured it." The audience watched silently now. "We measured it too. We confirmed your results exactly. The plasma destabilizes at 2.3 seconds. But we asked a different question. Not, when does it fail, but why does it fail, and more importantly, can we stop it from failing?" She expanded the hologram, showing layers of overlapping fields. "The plasma destabilizes because of magnetic irregularities that cascade through the containment system. You knew this, but you treated it as inevitable. We treated it as a problem to solve." A Vrellan physicist stood up. "We tried active correction systems. They cannot respond fast enough. The cascade happens in microseconds." "Yes," Chun agreed. "So we built correction systems that operate in nanoseconds. We built them to predict where instabilities would form before they fully developed. We built them to correct problems that had not happened yet. The computational requirements are enormous," Chun finished. "So we made better computers. Much better. We needed them, so we built them. We did not accept that it could not be done. We just kept working until it worked." She could see the frustration on faces throughout the auditorium. These were people who had spent lifetimes perfecting technology within accepted limits. She was telling them those limits were optional. An elderly Thari weapons master raised a tentacle. Dr. Chun, this is not about effort or determination. Mathematics is absolute. If the theorem says something cannot work, it cannot work. Your confidence does not change reality. Chun smiled. The theorem is beautiful mathematics. It is also based on assumptions. You assumed that correction had to happen after destabilization began. You assumed that magnetic fields had to be static between adjustments. You assumed computational limitations based on your processor designs. Every one of those assumptions made sense when the theorem was written. They are just not the only possible assumptions. She pulled up another schematic, this one showing a railgun design. Take kinetic weapons. The theorem says projectiles cannot exceed certain velocities without self-destructing from stress. This is true with traditional designs. So we stopped using traditional designs. The schematic animated, showing a projectile that changed shape during flight. Our projectiles use their own stress as additional propulsion. The faster they go, the more stressed they become, the more they reshape themselves to go even faster. We turned the limitation into a feature. A Concordat engineer shouted from the middle rows. That makes no sense. The stress should tear the projectile apart. It does, Chun agreed calmly. Constantly. The projectile is always tearing itself apart. It is also constantly reforming. The outer layer ablates while the inner core compresses and redirects. By the time it hits the target, it has essentially replaced itself 3 or 4 times. The projectile that arrives is not the same one that left the barrel. Not in any meaningful way. The auditorium erupted in arguments. Scientists shouted at each other across the rows. Some demanded to see the designs. Others declared it impossible. Chun waited for the noise to die down. I know this is frustrating, she said finally. You have built incredible civilizations with incredible technology. You have done things we are still learning to match. But you made one critical mistake. You decided that optimization meant perfection within limits. We decided that optimization meant removing the limits. She changed the hologram again, showing a beam weapon array. Energy weapons. The theorem says they must cycle to dissipate heat. The faster they fire, the longer they must cool. This creates a natural rhythm to combat. Fire, cool, cool. You designed your tactics around this rhythm. You designed your armor to survive it. You made it fundamental to how warfare works. The weapon in the hologram fired continuously, no cooling cycle at all. We designed weapons that turn heat into another weapon. Excess thermal energy gets channeled into secondary systems. The hotter our beam weapons get, the more attack vectors they create. The weapon never cools, because cooling is waste and we hate waste. A Karlothi general stood up, his scales flushed with agitation. This is madness. Weapons should be elegant, efficient, predictable. What you describe is chaos. Chun nodded. You are right. Our weapons are not elegant. They are complicated, redundant, over-engineered messes. We put backup systems on top of backup systems. We design them to work when everything goes wrong. We assume the user will make mistakes and the environment will be hostile and the enemy will know exactly how the weapon functions. Then we make it work anyway. But why? The general demanded. Why make things so complicated? Because wars are not elegant, Chine said simply. Combat is not efficient. Soldiers are not perfect. The universe does not care about your elegant equations when someone is shooting at you. We design for reality, not for ideal conditions. She walked to the edge of the stage. Every species here has optimized weapons for peak performance. You have found the absolute best version of technology within the theorem's limits. You have achieved excellence. We are very impressed. The audience waited, sensing the other shoe about to drop. We just decided that peak performance under ideal conditions was not good enough. We wanted weapons that performed well under terrible conditions. We wanted guns that worked when they were damaged, dirty, poorly maintained, used by tired soldiers who had not slept in 3 days. We wanted artillery that adjusted for wind, weather, gravity, air pressure, and the curvature of the planet without the operator thinking about any of it. Chun pulled up a final schematic, showing a simple rifle, the same one Admiral Vexith had tested. This weapon has 17 separate safety systems, 3 backup power supplies, self-repairing components, automatic calibration, environmental adaptation. It costs 4 times as much to produce as your standard plasma rifle. It is twice as heavy. It requires more maintenance, more training, more logistics. She paused. It is also almost impossible to use incorrectly. It is almost impossible to break. It is almost impossible to counter. Because we did not design a weapon. We designed a system that makes the soldier carrying it more effective regardless of circumstances. The auditorium was quiet now. The anger had faded, replaced by something else. Comprehension, maybe, or perhaps the beginning of it. You want to know our secret? Chum said. We have no secret. We just start every design with the assumption that nothing will work right. The soldier will be scared and tired. The weapon will be damaged. The environment will be hostile. The enemy will be smart. And then we build something that works anyway. We over-engineer because war is chaos, and chaos requires redundancy. She looked down at the thousands of faces staring back at her. You mastered warfare within the rules you established. That is an achievement we respect deeply. We just never agreed to play by those rules. We wrote new ones. Not because we are smarter or better. Just because we were willing to try. Dr. Sarah Chun finished her presentation to silence. Then slowly, starting from the back rows, someone began a rhythmic clicking sound. The Thaxian equivalent of applause. It spread through the auditorium as other species joined in their own ways. Not everyone. Some scientists left in anger. Some sat in thoughtful silence. But enough understood. Humanity had not broken the galaxy's understanding of weapons. They had simply asked questions everyone else had stopped asking, and kept working until they found answers that nobody else had believed existed. That was the human way. Find the impossible, then engineer a solution anyway. The Shoggoth hegemony had watched humanity's demonstration with great interest. As one of the Concordat's most powerful military forces, they understood the implications immediately. These new weapons represented a shift in galactic power. The Shoggoth leadership faced a choice. Acquire the technology or eliminate those who possessed it. They chose both. High. Commander Draxus commanded the invasion fleet personally. 200 warships, carrying 50,000 of the hegemony's finest warriors. Their target was New Vancouver, a human colony world with a population of 30,000. Defended by a garrison of less than 3,000 soldiers. The mathematics was simple. Overwhelming force against a minor outpost. The colony would fall in hours. The survivors would be leverage. And the humans would share their weapons technology or watch their people suffer. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Vancouver system. Draxus expected immediate surrender. Humans were new to galactic politics. They would understand that resistance was pointless. Perhaps they would be reasonable. Instead, the colony sent a single message. Leave now. This is your only warning. Draxus laughed. 3,000 defenders warning away 50,000 attackers. Human arrogance was even greater than intelligence reports suggested. He gave the order to advance. The fleet moved toward the planet. As they crossed into effective weapons range, Draxus expected the orbital defense platforms to open fire. They were standard Concordat designs, nothing that could threaten his fleet significantly. He would lose a few ships, his forces would land, and the conquest would proceed as planned. The orbital platforms did fire, but they were not standard Concordat designs. The first salvo destroyed 16 ships instantly. Not damaged, destroyed. The plasma beams burned through shields and armor like they were not there. The beams did not flicker or fade. They tracked targets with impossible precision, adjusting to evasive maneuvers before the ships even completed them. Draxus stared at his tactical display in shock. "Return fire! All ships, return fire!" His fleet opened up with everything they had. Hundreds of weapons, from standard plasma casters to heavy kinetic rounds. The orbital platform's point defense systems activated. This was standard. Every defense platform had point defense. What was not standard was the performance. The incoming fire simply stopped. Not some of it. All of it. Plasma shots destabilized meters before impact. Kinetic rounds exploded or veered off course. Missiles lost guidance and spiraled away harmlessly. The platforms operated like they knew exactly where every shot would be before it was fired. "Impossible," Draxus whispered. His fleet was barely scratching the platforms while they methodically destroyed his ships. "Commander, the platforms are using adaptive defense systems," his tactical officer reported, voice shaking. "They are learning our firing patterns in real time. Each shot we take makes them more effective at countering the next one." Draxus made a decision. The platforms were too dangerous. He would bypass them and land ground forces directly. His warriors would overwhelm the colony through sheer numbers. All troop ships, proceed to landing zones. Ignore the platforms. Get our soldiers on the ground. 30 troop transports broke formation and dove toward the planet. The platforms let them go. That should have been reassuring. It was not. The transports entered the atmosphere and headed for the primary colony city. As they approached, ground-based defenses opened fire. Draxus watched the tactical feed, expecting standard anti-air artillery. What he saw defied understanding. The defensive fire curved. Not slightly. It curved in complete arcs, tracking targets around obstacles, through valleys, between buildings. Shots that missed circled back for second attempts. The artillery shells seemed to be thinking. "Sir, those projectiles have guidance systems," the tactical officer said. "Each one is independently targeted and course-correcting. They are communicating with each other. They are cooperating." 5 transports went down in the first minute. 10 more in the second. The surviving transports scattered, trying to land anywhere they could. Some made it to the ground. 14,000 warriors poured out, forming up for the assault. The humans were waiting. Garrison. Commander Elizabeth Torres watched the Shawgroth deployment from her command center. 3,000 defenders against 14,000 attackers. The numbers looked bad. They were not. "All units, weapons free," she said calmly. "Remember your training. Let the equipment do the work." The Shawgroth advanced in standard hegemony formation. Disciplined, professional, using proper cover and fire tactics. They had fought 100 battles and won them all. They expected this battle to be difficult but winnable. Superior numbers and experience would prevail. The human defenders opened fire. The first thing the Shawgroth noticed was the accuracy. Human soldiers hit targets at ranges that should have been impossible. Not sometimes, every time. Shots that should have missed by meters found their marks perfectly. It was like fighting opponents who could see the future. The second thing they noticed was the sustained fire. Human weapons did not cycle, did not cool, did not pause. Plasma streams that should have lasted seconds burned for minutes. The defenders maintained continuous fire while the Shawgroth had to carefully time their attacks around cooling periods. The third thing was the adaptive nature of everything. Human weapons learned. A Shoggoth warrior would find good cover, fire from it successfully once, and then discover that the cover no longer worked. The human weapons had analyzed the angle, calculated his position, and adjusted their fire patterns. Cover that should have been safe became a death trap. "Push forward!" roared Commander Grexith, leading the hegemony's elite shock troops. "They are only 3,000. We are the Shoggoth. We do not retreat." His warriors charged. It was a mistake. The human weapons switched modes. The sustained plasma streams shut off. In their place came a new kind of fire. Explosive rounds that detonated in midair, creating overlapping kill zones. Smart projectiles that identified groups and prioritized multiple targets. Area denial systems that made entire sections of the battlefield impassable. Grexith's charge broke against the wall of fire, so intense it seemed solid. His elite shock troops, veterans who had never retreated, fell back in disarray. The battle continued for 6 days. The Shoggoth tried everything. Night attacks, massed assaults, tactical withdrawal and re-engagement, even orbital bombardment from the surviving ships. Nothing worked. The human defenders fought with weapons that seemed to anticipate every tactic. Thermal imaging failed because human equipment spoofed heat signatures. Acoustic targeting failed because the weapons generated false sound patterns. Even basic visual targeting became unreliable as the human systems created holographic decoys. On day 4, Commander Torres received reports of Shoggoth warriors trying to capture human weapons. The attempts failed. The weapons had biometric locks tied to genetic markers. A Shoggoth touching a human rifle found it immediately locked and useless. More than that, the weapon broadcast a distress signal that drew every nearby human system to that location, like a beacon dot by day 6. The Shoggoth had suffered 12,000 casualties. The human defenders had lost 231 soldiers. The mathematics no longer made sense. High Commander Draxus, watching from his flagship in orbit, finally understood. Humanity had not simply built better weapons. They had built weapons that made average soldiers perform like experts, and experts perform like legends. They had engineered the chaos out of combat. When the Concordat peacekeeping fleet arrived, Draxus ordered a full retreat. His remaining forces withdrew in disorder, leaving behind thousands of dead and dozens of captured. The mighty Shoggoth hegemony, conquerors of 40 systems, had been defeated by a garrison, defending a minor colony. The Concordat inspectors who arrived to document the battle found something remarkable. The human defensive positions were barely damaged. The colony itself was mostly intact. The civilians had suffered minimal casualties. That should have been impossible in a battle of this intensity. Admiral Vesith walked through the human defensive lines, examining their equipment. The weapons looked used but not abused. Soldiers cleaned and checked them with practiced efficiency. He stopped by a young private who could not have been more than 20 years old. "You held this position for 6 days against superior numbers," Vesith said. "How?" The private shrugged. "The gun did most of the work, sir. I just pointed it in the right general direction. It handled the aiming, the adjustment, the target prioritization. I just had to trust the equipment." Vesith picked up the rifle with permission. It was heavier than the prototype he had tested months ago, more robust. He could see the wear on the exterior, but also the self-repair systems already working on minor damage. The weapon was not just a tool. It was a partner. Commander Torres briefed the Concordat inspectors personally. "Our doctrine is different from yours," she explained. "You train your soldiers to operate weapons perfectly. We design our weapons to work with imperfect soldiers. Humans get tired. We get scared. We make mistakes. Our equipment compensates for that. But the computational requirements, one inspector began, are handled by the weapons themselves, Torres finished. Each rifle has more processing power than your capital ship navigation computer. Each artillery piece can coordinate with every other piece in theater automatically. Each defensive system shares data in real time with every other system. We do not just arm our soldiers. We network them. Vexith thought about that. The Shoggoth had fought 3,000 individual soldiers and lost. They should have fought 3,000 soldiers operating as a single coordinated system and understood the difference much earlier. The Battle of New Vancouver became required study in every military academy in the Concordat. Analysts spent years breaking down what had happened. The conclusion was always the same. Humanity had not won through superior numbers or tactics. They had won through engineering. They had built weapons that treated warfare as a systems problem and solved it, with overwhelming redundancy and computational power. The galaxy learned an important lesson. Humanity's weapons were not just impossible to wield effectively. They were impossible to wield ineffectively. Every backup system had backups. Every failure mode had corrections. Every limitation had workarounds. The weapons were designed by engineers who assumed everything would go wrong and built accordingly. The Shoggoth hegemony never fully recovered from the defeat. Their reputation as an unstoppable military force was shattered. The 40 systems they had conquered began to see them as vulnerable. Some rebelled. Others simply stopped fearing them. All because 3,000 humans with impossible weapons had made the hegemony look ordinary. 3 years after the Battle of New Vancouver, the Concordat Parliament convened a special session. The topic was simple, but its implications were vast. They needed to understand human weapons development. Not to copy it, though many had tried and failed. They needed to understand the philosophy behind it, the thinking that made the impossible routine. The human government agreed to send a delegation. Not diplomats or scientists this time. They sent the actual engineers who designed the weapons. People who built things. Not people who talked about building things. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb stood at the podium in the Grand Chamber. He was 63 years old, with calloused hands and the bearing of someone who had spent more time in workshops than boardrooms. He looked at the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds and spoke plainly. You want to know our secret? I will tell you. We design every weapon assuming the person using it is an idiot. The chamber erupted in offended noise. Representatives shouted in various languages. Webb waited for it to die down, completely unbothered. I do not mean that as an insult, he continued. I mean it as engineering reality. Soldiers are not idiots. But soldiers are human. Or Thaxian or Coralathi or whatever species. They get tired. They get scared. They make mistakes. They forget their training. They use equipment in ways we never intended. Our job as engineers is to make weapons that work anyway. He pulled up a hologram showing a standard Concordat plasma rifle. This is a good weapon. Well designed, efficient, effective within its parameters. But what happens when those parameters are not met? What happens when the soldier using it is exhausted and has not slept in 3 days? What happens when it gets dropped in mud? What happens when the enemy knows exactly how it works and has trained to counter it? The hologram switched to a human rifle. This is our answer. This weapon has 17 separate safety systems. Why? Because soldiers will make 17 different kinds of mistakes. This weapon has 3 backup power supplies. Why? Because the first 2 might fail. This weapon automatically calibrates itself every time it is fired. Why? Because soldiers will not do it manually when they are under stress. A Concordat general stood up, his translator converting his words to Earth Standard English. You sacrifice efficiency for redundancy. This is wasteful. Webb shook his head. No, this is realistic. Efficiency assumes perfect conditions. War does not provide perfect conditions. War is chaos. Equipment fails. Plans fall apart. Communication breaks down. We design for that chaos. We over-engineer because under-engineering gets people killed. He expanded the hologram, showing the internal mechanisms of the rifle. Every component in this weapon is designed to fail safely. If the primary firing system fails, it switches to backup 1. If that fails, backup 2. If that fails, backup 3. The weapon will continue operating through multiple critical failures. Why? Because in combat, you do not get to stop and repair your equipment. A Vrellan scientist made a dismissive gesture with her tendrils. This is paranoid design philosophy. You prepare for problems that may never occur. Yes, Webb agreed immediately. That is exactly what we do. We prepare for every problem we can imagine, and then we prepare for problems we cannot imagine. We assume Murphy's Law is not just true but optimistic. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong at the worst possible time. So we design around it. He changed the hologram to show a human artillery piece. This weapon has 43 sensors monitoring environmental conditions. Temperature, air pressure, humidity, wind speed, and direction at multiple altitudes. Even the curvature and rotation of the planet. Why? Because all of these things affect projectile trajectory. Your artillery requires trained operators to calculate these factors. Ours does it automatically. The soldier just points and shoots. The weapon handles everything else. But this removes skill from warfare, another general protested. You make soldiers dependent on technology. Webb smiled without humor. No, we free soldiers from tedious calculations so they can focus on tactics and strategy. We do not make them dependent. We make them more effective. A soldier using our artillery does not need to be an expert in ballistics. They just need to know where to shoot and when. The weapon handles the mathematics. He walked to the edge of the stage. Every species in this chamber has optimized soldiers for equipment. You train your people to use your weapons properly. We do the opposite. We optimize equipment for soldiers. We design weapons that adapt to their users, not users who must adapt to weapons. A new hologram appeared, showing data from the Battle of New Vancouver. Your analysts have studied this battle extensively. You know our defenders were outnumbered 5-1. You know we won with minimal casualties. You think this was because of weapon superiority. You are partially correct. Webb highlighted specific engagements from the battle. Private First Class Chun, third day of combat, had been awake for 42 hours. He was exhausted, making mistakes. His accuracy should have been terrible. But his rifle compensated. It adjusted for hand tremors. It predicted where he was trying to aim and corrected for fatigue. It prioritized targets he might miss. The weapon made him effective when he should have been useless. Another engagement appeared. Sergeant Williams' fifth day. His weapon took a direct hit that damaged the primary firing system and 2 of the backup systems. In your militaries, that weapon would be non-functional. He would need to requisition a replacement. Our weapon kept firing using the remaining backup systems and reported the damage to logistics automatically. Sergeant Williams did not even know his weapon was damaged till after the battle. Webb showed a dozen more examples. Soldiers making mistakes that should have been fatal. Equipment failures that should have disabled weapons. Tactical errors that should have cost lives. In every case, the human equipment compensated, adapted, or provided alternative solutions. This is what we do, Webb said. We design weapons that work despite everything going wrong. Not because we are pessimists, but because we are realists. Combat is unpredictable. Humans are fallible. Equipment breaks. Our engineering philosophy accepts these truths and builds accordingly. He returned to the center of the stage. You want to copy our technology. Many have tried. All have failed. You know why? Because you try to copy the solutions without understanding the problem we were solving. You look at our plasma containment systems and try to replicate them. But you do not understand that we designed those systems assuming they would be used incorrectly, in terrible conditions, by tired soldiers against prepared enemies. You design for ideal performance. We design for worst-case scenarios. A long silence filled the chamber. Then an old Daxian scientist, one who had been part of the original team that studied human weapons, spoke. Chief Engineer Webb, you were telling us that your entire military doctrine is based on assuming failure? No, Webb corrected. We base it on preparing for failure. Big difference. We assume soldiers will make mistakes. We assume equipment will break. We assume plans will fail. And then we build systems that work anyway. We do not accept failure. We just acknowledge it is possible and engineer around it. He pulled up a final schematic. This is our standard combat rifle. The one used at New Vancouver. It costs 4 times what your plasma rifles cost. It weighs twice as much. It requires more maintenance, more training, more logistics support. It is, by your standards, inefficient and overbuilt. The schematic expanded, showing every system, every backup, every redundancy. But this weapon will fire after being dropped in mud, water, sand, or snow. It will operate in temperatures from -80 to +70 degrees. It will function at sea level and at high altitude. It will work in the hands of a trained expert and in the hands of a terrified recruit. It will continue operating through multiple component failures. It will adapt to different users automatically. It will coordinate with other weapons without input. And it will do all of this reliably, predictably, for years. Webb looked out at the representatives. That is what we build. Not the most elegant weapons. Not the most efficient weapons. The most reliable weapons. Because in war, reliability matters more than efficiency. Because soldiers do not need perfect equipment. They need equipment that works when nothing else does. The session continued for hours. Engineers from the human delegation explained specific design choices. Why weapons had so many backups. Why they prioritized user safety over performance. Why they built in so much redundancy that it seemed wasteful. Every answer came back to the same philosophy. Assume everything will go wrong and design accordingly. As the session ended, Admiral Vexith approached Webb privately. Your people have changed warfare, he said simply. Not through force or conquest, but through engineering. You have made the impossible routine. Webb shrugged. We just build things that work. That is what engineers do. We see problems, and we solve them. The galaxy said plasma could not stay stable past 2.3 seconds. That was a problem. So we solved it. The galaxy said there were hard limits to weapon performance. Those were problems. So we solved them. We did not break your rules. We just decided they were not really rules, just challenges nobody had beaten yet. Vexith thought about that. What will you build next? Webb smiled. What do you need? Give us a problem. Tell us something is impossible. We will figure it out. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. You show us walls and we find doors. You show us limits and we find solutions. Not because we are smarter or better, just because we never learned to accept that something cannot be done. Over the following years, humanity integrated fully into the Concordat military structure. Their weapons became the most sought-after technology in the galaxy. Not because they were the most powerful, though they were formidable. Because they were the only ones designed by engineers, who assumed everything would go wrong and built accordingly. Other species tried to adopt human engineering philosophy. Some succeeded. Many did not. It required a fundamental shift in thinking, from optimizing for peak performance to optimizing for reliable performance under terrible conditions. It meant accepting that elegant solutions were not always the best solutions. It meant overbuilding, over-engineering, and adding redundancy that seemed wasteful. But those who made the shift discovered what humanity had known all along. Warfare was chaos. Combat was unpredictable. Soldiers were human, regardless of species. And in that chaos, what mattered most was not having the best equipment under perfect conditions. What mattered was having equipment that worked when everything else failed. The Concordat's military academies added a new course to their curriculum: Engineering for Failure. It taught what Chief Engineer Marcus Webb had explained in the Parliament that day. Assume nothing will work right. Build for worst-case scenarios. Make reliability more important than efficiency. Prepare for the impossible, then make it work anyway. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was not plasma containment technology or advanced computing or smart projectiles. It was a philosophy, a way of thinking about problems. The understanding that impossible was not a wall but a challenge. That limitations were not final but negotiable. And that the best solution was not the most elegant, but the one that worked when everything else failed. The humans had not joined Concordat to teach the galaxy new physics. They had joined to remind the galaxy of an old truth. Engineers solve problems. They do not accept limitations. They do not bow to impossibilities. They just keep working until things function, even when all conventional wisdom says they should not. That was the human way. Find the impossible. Engineer a solution. Move on to the next impossible thing. And they were just getting started dotting workshops across human space. Engineers were already working on the next generation of impossible weapons. Devices that would make the plasma rifles and smart artillery look primitive. Systems that other species would declare mathematically impossible. Technology that would redefine warfare once again. But they were not doing it to conquer or dominate. They were doing it because someone, somewhere, would eventually need weapons that worked when everything else failed. And when that day came, humanity would be ready. They would have built something impossible, made it reliable, and figured out how to mass produce it. Because that was what human engineers did. They made the impossible routine, one over-engineered solution at a time.